A lot of web apps need some kind of auth service, and you essentially have two options. You can either roll your own, or you could choose a software as a service like Firebase Auth. In this video, we're going to go over how to set up Firebase Auth with Astro. Now, the advantage of using a SAAS is they give you pre-built functions that you can call, and they handle all the worrying about passwords and emails and all that kind of stuff in your database, and you only have to worry about calling their functions. Now, the disadvantage, of course, is that you don't own that data, the service does, and you don't have a lot of control over how it's implemented. What we're going to do is set this up, and you really need three things. You need some kind of post endpoint where you can post from a form to create account, log in, and log out. Then you also need functions. These are the Firebase Auth functions that allow you to call the methods that create, log in, and log out a user. And then finally, you need some kind of middleware to protect the routes. So once a user is logged in, they can then view your authenticated routes. And when they're not logged in, those routes are protected. So we're going to use all three of those things and also build our own form as we go. Now, I will mention that I've got the starting code in the description. You just want to make sure you grab the main branch if you want to follow along with me. If you want to see the finished code, just grab the finished code branch and you can follow along with me there as well. Finally, before we jump in, if you're interested more in middleware and auth with Astro, I do have a course called Learn Astro, which is really close to being completed, and I've just completed several big modules on both middleware and authentication. We actually go over a basic auth method, then Firebase Auth, and finally we roll our own with Lucia Auth. So if you're interested in a more thorough version of what we're doing here, check out my course at learnastro.dev, and there's a coupon code in the description. You ready? Let's jump in. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. All right, so we've got the base code here, and I just want to walk through a couple of things so you have a sense of kind of how this is working. We are using Tailwind, but we're not going to really be doing any styling. I've got components set up already. We've got a base layout that essentially just has this upper section, and then everything else is dropped right down here. And we only have one route currently, which is this index route that simply says homepage. Now we've got a bunch of different components that we've got set up here, like buttons and links and inputs that we're going to use to build all the forms we're going to need. Now we need to do this in several different stages. The first thing I want to do is create a new account route. Now you don't have to do this in a route, you could just do this in a component, but I think in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and grab this right here. We'll just duplicate this and we're just going to call this new. So this will be where new people are brought in, right? So if they haven't yet created an account, they'll need to create one here. So we're just going to say something like create new account. Now first I want to come over here and we're just going to jump over to new, and there we go. So now it says create new account. All right, now I need to go ahead and create a form. So let's do that first. And for now, I'm going to not do anything with the action. And we're just going to come in here and I'm going to add several things. We want the email and we also want a password. And then we'll have a button at the very bottom as well. So to keep this focused on Firebase, instead of creating all these components, I've created them ahead of time for us here. We simply need an input right here. And we have several things we need to give this. In fact, if I command click into here, you'll see we need to give it a name and a label. All it's doing is creating this where we've got a label that will then point to whatever the input happens to be. We also are going to want to pass along a type. In this case, that type would be email, right? So let's go ahead and come over here. We're going to have a name, first of all, and here we'll just call this email. And the label will be something like your email. There you go. You see it pop in right there. And then finally, I do want to go ahead and give this a type. In this case, this will be a type of email. So right over here, it should know now that this is a type of email. We've got the basics of this set up. Now we can add a little bit of styling here with Tailwind. You don't have to know all of Tailwind to do this. We're just going to add a grid with like a gap of 2. And that means when I come down here and I duplicate this, now we should have a little gap between these two. Now you might also want to wrap all of this and add a grid as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Grid, gap. We'll do something like gap 4. And that way create new account is kind of separate from the rest of that. Now obviously I don't want this to be the same thing. We're going to have password here. We'll say your password. And then finally, this is a type password. That way, as we type in here, we can't see what we're typing. All right, so we've got an email, we've got a password. Finally, let's go ahead and add a button. And again, I've got this component already. And in this case, we're going to have just, let's say, like create account. Now, if we want to, we can change around a couple of things here. For instance, I might actually increase the gap here, make this a little bit bigger. Maybe let's do the same thing here as well. There we go, just to kind of separate those out. And then let me click inside this button here. You'll notice that I've got a couple of variants set up, and I've done videos before on how I use CVA to set these up, especially with Tailwind, but I've got like a primary and an accent. I've also got a checkbox. I used this for a different project, some sizes as well, but what I want to do is actually grab this accent color. So let's come inside here, and I'm just going to say that the intent is accent, or maybe you'd want to call this like variant instead. But either way, now it's red, and if I come in here and I add an email, like email@email.com, and we have a password and I create an account, you'll see that now it says something and it says the email right there. Okay, so we're set to go. It's actually operational as a form. Obviously, we need to now hook this up with Firebase. So the first thing I want to do is come over to Firebase, which is just at firebase.google.com. And I'm going to go to my console here and create a brand new project. So right over here, let's call this something like Astro Firebase Auth. And I'll hit continue. I do not need to add analytics to this. And now we just need to wait for a couple seconds. All right, through the magic of editing, it is ready to go. So now let's come inside here and I want to click this web app because that's what we're going to be doing, right? So let's call this something like my site and we'll just register the app. Okay, so we need to do two things. We need to install Firebase and then we also need to add this config. So let's first of all come over here and let's just stop our dev server and install Firebase. And while that is working, let's come over here and grab this. And I'm just going to add this in my src directory. Let's do a folder. We'll call it Firebase. And then I'll do /config.ts. And then I'll just drop all that right inside there. And you'll see that it's given us access to everything we need. Obviously, it's got an API key and all this kind of stuff. But the way Firebase works, this doesn't matter. This can be on the client. Although in this project, it's all going to be server-side anyhow. But just so you know, that's how it works. And you can lock down things like your database using certain rules. Okay, so up here, you'll see that we need to add available libraries that we might need right here. So what I'm going to do is come down here. And I'll just call this something like Project Auth. And this is simply called get auth, like this. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter from Firebase Auth right there, pulls in, and then let's just pass it the app. Now I want to access this other places in my site, so I want to go ahead and export this. And that way this right here will give us access to everything we need to set up authentication. So let's continue to the console, and now we should be set to go. In fact, if I come over here, I think it's under build, and I come to authentication, here's where we'll actually add new users and do everything we need to do. So I'm going to click get started, and that will give us access to the certain types of methods we want to use. In this case, we're just going to use the email and password. So let's go ahead and enable this. You can do passwordless if you want to as well, but right now I'm just going to keep it at this and save it. So now we've got this provider set up and ready to go, and that's really all we have to do with Firebase. Okay, so we've created a form. We've now connected Firebase to our account. Next, what I want to do is use an experimental feature in Astro called Actions. Because really all we need is some kind of post endpoint where when somebody submits this form, we can submit it to a post endpoint, do all the processing server side, and then create an account for them. But Astro Actions allows you to do this a lot simpler, and it actually gives you authentication as well. So what I'm going to do is close this down and jump over to my Astro config file, and I just simply need to add this as an experimental feature. Now, eventually, this will come out of experimental, so if you're watching this later, just check the formatting here, but whatever we do should work going forward because we're going to keep it really, really simple. So let's come in here with Actions, and I'll just set this to true. This now means we can use the experimental Actions features. Now, I mentioned we are going to use a post endpoint, and if you know anything about Astro, you know that by default, it's all static site generation. So if you want to use SSR or server-side rendering, you have to add an adapter. So before we do anything else, I'm going to come over here and add one more thing, and that is npx astro add, and we need to add an adapter. So we could do like Node or Netlify or Vercel or any of the adapters available. Let's just do Vercel, and the great CLI with Astro will just walk us through this step by step. So yes, I will let it install that. Yes, it can update my config, and now we should be set and ready to go. Now, by default, it uses server-side rendering, which means everything is server-side rendered. You could set this up to use hybrid instead, which means it's statically generated by default. And on any individual page route, you can set pre-rendering to false, and it will server-side render that page. However, in this case, we're just going to have everything be server-side rendered, which means as people go to your site and hit a particular route, the server generates that file live and sends back the HTML that it's needed. That allows us to do a lot of the rendering on the server, and that's one thing we'll need for our post endpoints. So let's go ahead and close this down. Now we've got a form, we've got Firebase set up, and we've now got SSR ready and our Actions experimental feature ready to set up a new account action. So I'm going to come over here, and we just need to create an Actions directory. This does have to be called Actions, and then I need an index.ts. Now, you may not be using TypeScript. You can also use JavaScript if you want. I've just set up this project with TypeScript, so that's what we're going to do. Now, all I have to do is export a constant, and this is not a default export, just a normal export. That's called server. This is simply an object that will have key value pairs for each individual action I want. Now, I can write these directly in here if I want to, or I can write them in a separate file, and that's what I'm going to do. So for the first one, we're going to have this action be called like create account. All right, we're going to point this to a create account function, which I'm going to write right over here. So let's come over here. We'll say create account.ts, and here let's export a const. We're going to call it create account. And what I want to do now is define an action. So essentially what this is going to do is take a validation schema and generate a post endpoint for me automatically. You can also hand roll this yourself if you don't want to use this experimental feature. It just takes some of the busy work out of like checking to make sure it's an email type and that kind of thing. All right, so let's go ahead and use the define action helper from Astro Actions. And we've got several things we can have here. We can tell it what type of content to accept. In this case, it's going to accept a form type. So this tells it it's getting form data. So we're going to pass this in as form data. Secondly, we're going to have a particular input. This will be an object, and we're going to use Zod, which is the validation library. We're going to grab it here from Astro Actions. It does all the work of setting it up for us. All we have to do is just have an object here where we define anything that's going to be one of these inputs. You might remember we had just two, right? We had an email, and this we're going to do z.string, and then we'll just make sure that it is an email type. Now the default message here, if it's not an email, it will yell at them and say, hey, this has to be a type of email. That's all I have to do for validation. Now we're also going to have a password. This will simply be z.string. And you can narrow this more if you want to based on whatever Firebase gives you, or just worry about their error handling and let that take care of it for you. For our purposes, that's all we'll do. Now you do need one thing always, and that is you need a handler. This handler tells it what to do when this particular action is hit. So whenever somebody hits this create account, what I want to do is do something in the handler. So I'm going to set this up as an async request, and then let's just destructure what we're going to get from the input here. So this will all be passed along down here, and I just want the email and I want the password. Now with those two things in mind, I'm going to come inside here and create a new account using my Firebase Auth. Now thankfully Firebase makes this really easy. I'm going to await create user with email and password. You can see it pulling right there. And as soon as I hit enter, you'll see that it pulls it in from Firebase Auth. Now this requires a few things. Let's give ourselves a little bit more space here. First of all, I have to pass in the actual auth app. All right, we set that up in our config. So if I come over here to our config, right here, this is what we want, this project auth. So I'm going to go ahead and grab project auth and hit enter, and that should import this here from project auth. And then it also needs an email and it needs a password. Well, thankfully we have those in email and password. Now that's really all we're going to do. And if there's an error, it'll actually pass along the error for us. So it's that simple. Now, the reason we named this email and password is if I jump over to my new page, you'll remember that we named this email and password. And when we pass along the form data, it'll actually pass it along based on whatever we've named it here. So if we called this like Joe and Harry, that's what we would have to pass along on the back end. Now, there's a couple of different ways we could handle this. I can come in here with an ID like create account, and then jump down here below, and let's just add a little script tag. Astro will automatically modulize this, and we can write TypeScript directly in here. So here, let's just grab the form. We'll call this like create form equals document.querySelector, and we'll simply select the form that has the ID of create account. Now, once we have access to that, let's go ahead and add an event listener. So the create form.add event listener, and we're simply going to listen for the submit event. Now we're going to get an event that the browser will pass to us. So the first thing I want to do is e.prevent default, so it doesn't refresh the page or like submit it to that page automatically. Then the next thing I want to do is actually hit that Astro action. Now this is an asynchronous request, so I need to come up here and add a sync right here. And then down below here, I'll simply await. And here we're going to await actions like this, and I can pull this in with enter from Astro Actions. So right here, and because this is a module, I can import directly inside of here. Then when I hit dot, I can access any of my actions. Now you may remember we created this account right here, this action, but we have yet to actually have it right inside here. So let's go ahead and pull this in like this, and that way this server contains the actual action. Now you can, again, do all this inside here if you want to, but I found that separating these out makes it a little bit easier to understand where everything lives. So this is what we're going to hit whenever I pick off this create account action. So if I come back over here and I hit dot once again, you'll see that now it already knows live, hey, I've got this action available to me. Now all I have to do is pass along the form data I'm going to get from the form. Now the browser gives you access to this if you just do new form data, and I'll simply pass in the create form. Now, right now it's going to yell at me because TypeScript says, hey, this could not be there. So what I need to do is come over here and just type this here as an HTML form element like this. And that way it knows it's a form type. That means I can also get rid of this if I want to as well. But now every time I hit this endpoint, it will then hit my action here, fire this off, and then basically authenticate a new user. So let's go ahead and do that now. If I come up here, we'll refresh here. I'm going to simply have an email at email.com. We'll have something for a password and hit create account. Nothing visibly has happened, so we need to actually change that around. But if I come over here and I look at my users, you'll see that now I have email at email.com. It's signed in. I've got a user ID. Everything is set and ready to go. So really, really easy to get started with, especially once you're using these actions from Astro. Now, it is possible that you get an error. For instance, what if I try to create another account with email@email.com? That should give me an error, right? Well, I get some helpers here with these Astro actions. So let's come over here, and I'm simply going to have the error and the data. We'll get both of these from await Astro actions, except instead of just calling create account directly on here, I'm now going to add one more thing, and that is the method of .safe. What this will do is wrap all this and give me back an error or data. So hopefully I don't get an error, but if I do, I can then do something with that. So first of all, let's just check to see if we have an error. Let's console.log the error. And then I also get one more little helper with these actions. Once again, Astro does great DX, and these actions are no exception. So I can check one more thing, and that would be if there is an input error type. So I can get this from Astro::actions right up here. I guess I could combine these, but I'm not sure why I didn't. But if it is this type, and I need to actually pass it the error, then it will pass back some more things as well. So I'm going to console.log the error dot, and it knows now that it's a type of form error, and I want to grab the fields. So before we do too much more, what I want to do is change one more little config option just to make sure that we get an error on the input fields as well. So let me come back over here, and let's go ahead and add this here where we're going to say like the max is something like 8 characters, okay? So normally I wouldn't limit a password to something like that, obviously, but I want to be able to show this off. So let's come over here. I'm going to open up the console down this way. We'll add an email@email.com, so that should give us an error. And then I'm also going to add some kind of password that's really long. And then as soon as I hit create account right here, it should fire off several things. So if I come over here, you'll notice I get a couple of different problems. I get the entire error message right here. You can see that here, where it tells me it's too big. The maximum is only 8 characters. It's a type of string, and it actually includes a default message of string must contain at most 8 characters. Now, importantly here, notice that it gives me the path to the password. This corresponds to the name of that input field. So let's come down this way, and now we're going to see this error.fields, where it simply gives me an object where I have the key is the name of the actual input, and the string is the error itself. So now we actually got this set up and ready to go. What we did not get is the Firebase error because we hit our error first. So let's come over here. Let's get rid of this. And now let's try to resubmit this. So if we come over here, now if I do email@email.com and some kind of password, whatever that happens to be, and hit create, now you'll notice that I get some other errors. So let me jump up top here. And I'm now getting a Firebase error where it says email already in use. So whether it's an error from Firebase or whether it's an error from my config that I set up, I can get this all on the front end and then do something with this. Now, I'll leave you to how you want to handle that. But for instance, when it comes to like an actual field error, what I would do is have error messages under password or email and then pop that up or have some kind of modal that pops up and says, here's the problem. Okay. So you can handle that on Blur if you want to as well. I just want to kind of cover the basics here and let you get in the minutia of how you want to handle the error. But hopefully you know now how to get the error and then you can do what you want with it. So that's what it will do if there is an error. Let's go ahead and just return here. Otherwise, what we're going to say is if there's not an error, let's simply window.location.reload. So we'll just reload the actual page itself. So if we did this correctly, I should be able to come over here and have some kind of email. So like chris@email.com and a password and create an account, and it should refresh and reload the page once we get back a successful response. Again, there are a lot of little edge things you want to pay attention to, like you may want to disable the create account button once it's been clicked or show a loading spinner or all those kinds of things, but I just want to kind of cover the basics. Okay, so now that we've actually created a new account, I want to come over and add some middleware. Let's come over here and inside the src directory, we will have a middleware.ts file, and middleware is built in by default into Astro. And here I just need to export a const. Again, this is not a default export. It's called onRequest. So whenever this is requested, I want to then do something. And again, I get a little helper from Astro called define middleware. This will give me typing if I want it. So I'm going to get things like the context. This includes everything from like the request object to a bunch of other things. And I'll also get the next function, which simply forwards along the request as it was intended in the first place. Now I do need to go ahead and make sure I return something. So at the end here, we could return like next right here, which means every time a route is hit, it will hit all of this and then simply return the next route or the thing it was trying to hit in the first place. So for right now, we're just going to leave that alone. And all I want to do is check inside of here to make sure the user is actually logged in. So we could have something like current user, and we get a helper here from Firebase called project auth, and I should import that, and then we'll just grab the current user. So this current user right now, we can actually forward along using something called Astro locals. Astro locals is an object that lives or dies on each page request, but can be included and like accessed in the front matter of a file. So here, let's go ahead and check to make sure we have a current user. And assuming we do have a current user, what I'm going to do is grab the context.locals, and I'll simply set something called a user email. You can name this whatever you want, but I'm going to name this and pass along the current user dot, And then you'll see I've got email, display name, all this kind of stuff that you get from Firebase. I just have an email, so that's what I'm going to pass along. Okay, now you'll see I'm getting a type error here because it doesn't know whether or not this exists. We can fix this if we want to by coming over to our env.d.ts file, and we can simply declare a new namespace. So we'll declare a namespace. We'll call it app, and we'll pass along an interface where we simply have locals. This is that object, and we'll simply declare our user email. And we'll say that this is a type of string, or it can also obviously be null as well. So if I come back over this way, you'll see that now it's happy because it knows that it'll either be a string or it will be null. Now, what's the point in doing it this way? Well, like I said, you can access the locals in the front matter of any individual page. Now, all of our routes are using a layout wrapper, so let me come over to our layout. And in the front matter here, this is all server side. I simply want to grab my astro.locals, and then what I want to do is pick off that user email. So I should have this or not have it. It'll either be string or null, right? So let's come down here, and just below here, I'm simply going to have a little check here, where we're going to say if we have a user email, so if this does exist, let's go ahead and then pass along a paragraph tag. This will say welcome, but simply include the user email. So every time I hit my middleware, which means every time I go to a route, it will check to see if I have a current user. If I do, it will set this in the locals object. We've typed it properly so it knows what to expect. And then in the layout, which every page currently uses, it will check for it and show it right here. Now you'll notice it's not actually working, and that's because when you first declare a middleware file, you usually have to restart your dev server, and then it should work after that. So let me come back over this way. And then when we create a new account, it should show us there. So let's just double check to make sure it's working. This should say null, right? So if I come over here and console log this, and it should say null. Yeah, so it does. Okay, so what we need to do is now either log in or create a new account. So let's maybe move to that next step where we create a login form. Now, we've done a lot of the hard work here, so all I'm going to do is grab my pages directory, we'll grab my new, and I'm just going to copy and paste this, and we'll call this login. Now, right here, I'm going to say login to your account. This should all be the exact same, except here, what we're going to do is say login, right? Now, down this way, we've got create form, which we're going to want to update. So right here, and down here, we'll also grab this as login account. And I guess we could also change this to say login form. Now, in this case, I don't want to hit my create account, right? I want to actually do a login account. So let's come back over here, and I'm going to just copy and paste this once again. Here we'll say login account.ts. Now, again, we've got a few things to change around here. This will be login account. We're going to define action where we get a form. We should get an email and a password. And then instead of creating a new user, we want to log in with that user. Once again, we get a nice helper function. This is called sign in with email and password. Right there from Firebase Auth. So right up here, this should now pull in. I don't need this one anymore. Signing with email and password should hit this endpoint login account. Now we've created it, but we have yet to actually set it up with our actions. So let's come over here. We're going to have login account, and this will come from login account that I'm going to import just like that. Okay, so now we've got two different actions we can use. And what I want to do is come over here and make sure we use the right one. So instead of create account, we're going to use the login account. And again, it already knows which ones I have, so I can pull it in directly here. So I'm passing along the form data. If there's an error, it should give me that error. Otherwise, it will simply just reload the window. So now let's come over here, and I'm going to manually go over to login like this. And I've got my email at email.com, and this is something I think was the password. There we go. Okay, I just mistyped it. Now notice it says welcome back email at email.com. This is all coming from my middleware. So now we can create an account, we can log in. Next, let's make sure we can log out. All right, so let's do two things. Let me first of all come back to the home page right here. It should still say email at email.com. And then let me jump over to the index page here as well. We're going to add a button here inside of a form. So let's add our form. We will not worry about the action right now, but let's give this an ID like logout form. And here, let's go ahead and pull in our button. We'll just simply say log out. All right, so this should now show right down here below. So maybe we want to add a little bit of spacing. We could do that here. Let's add something like grid gap, I don't know, 12, something like that. All right, there we go. So now if I click log out, it should submit this form right here. So if I hit this, it should submit. Nothing happens yet because we haven't hooked it up. Let's go ahead and first of all, add our script tag here. Now we can steal a lot of this here from our login. So maybe let's just grab this right here like this, and we'll just grab all this right here. Okay, cool. So in this case, what we want is a log out form. So let's grab all those and do log out. I just did Command D and grabbed each of those. And here, this would also be log out form. We'll submit, and here we're going to listen for a different action. Here we want a log out action. So let me come up here. We're going to grab this and copy it. Log out account. Now, in this sense, I'm not accepting anything really, and these are both optional, so I don't need anything here. But what I do want to do is use a different method here where we're going to sign out on the actual Firebase instance, the project auth. So I can grab the project auth dot, and then here we can just sign out like this. Now I'm not accepting anything here, so I don't need to take this in, and then I do need to rename this Logout account. Let's get rid of this too, since we don't need that import, and jump back over to my index and just make sure we import this now. This was called Logout account, and in JavaScript, obviously you can just do that. So we could also get rid of both of these as well, where the key and the value basically are the same name, right? Okay, so back over to our index page. Now what I want to do is in this form, I want to hit my Logout account, right? Logout account, and I don't need to pass along any form data, so I don't need that. But if I get an error, it should send me that. Otherwise, it should just simply return and then reload the window. So let's check to see how this works. Let's log out, and it logged out. The middleware removed that, and now it no longer is showing the login page. So we've created an account, we've logged in with the account, we've logged out with the account, we've set up some very basic middleware. The last thing we need to do is do a little bit more complex middleware. Now, the reason we're going to do this is to protect our home route. So if somebody tries to hit this home route and they are not logged in, it will redirect them to the login or create page. So let me close this down, and we're going to open up our middleware file. And inside here, we simply want to do a little check. We've already got if they're a current user. The other thing I want to get is which path they've hit. Now, I can grab this from the URL that we get from the context. So I'm just going to destructure the path name. We'll get this from the context.url. So the context includes a bunch of things. One of them is this URL object, and I'm grabbing this path name off of it. So let's first of all think about if the user is not logged in. So if there is no current user. So let's come over here, and I'm just going to say if there is no current user. And there's a couple of other things I want to think about, right? Because if the path name is something like new or login, I want them to be able to go there. So I'm going to say, and the path name is also not new, and the path name is also not login. And then finally, I don't want my post requests to redirect. I only want these to work with GET requests. So I'm going to simply say context.request method, and we'll set this equal to GET. So if all these things are true, then what I want to do is return the user to somewhere else. Now in SSR mode, you've got context.redirect as an option here, where I can redirect them to something like the login page. So notice what we're saying. If there's no current user and they're not on the newer login page, the only other page left is the home page, and it's a GET request, so I'm trying to get that page, then redirect them to login. So now if I come over here, let's try to go to the home page and refresh, you'll see it automatically redirects me. I think that was just some cache where it was still showing the user. Let's check. Yeah, so it won't even let me get there. Now this happens before the server returns a page, so nobody can ever see your homepage content and never even returns from the server. It just sends them directly to the login page. So let's say we logged in, we had email@email.com, and something was the password. There we go. So now it's welcome back email, except now they still are showing the login page. I don't want them to be able to log in if they've already logged in, right? So I also need to do another check over here. So I'll go ahead and leave that one alone, but I'm also going to say if there is a current user, and in here I want an or option. So I'm going to wrap this in parentheses. The path name is equal to new, or the path name is equal to /login. Then I just want to return a redirect, and this will simply be to the home page, right? So if they're trying to go to the login page and they're already logged in, you'll see it's already redirected me. If I try to go to login, it shouldn't let me, it redirects me. And if I try to go to new, it should redirect me as well. Now technically I could come inside here and we could add something like new with a / and it would still allow me to get there. So you could add that as another option. There's also a config to never allow the trailing slash. So maybe that would be the easier thing in this case. So let's come over to my Astro config, just like this. We'll add the trailing slash to never. Now, depending on what your build looks like, you may not be able to do this. You might have to handle that a different way or set it to always if it's always going to have that. But now if I come over here and I try to actually hit this new, it's simply going to say path not found. Now you may want to redirect that or handle that in a different way, but just to note that that is a little edge case, another one of these small things you have to pay attention to. But now we've successfully protected the home route as long as they're logged out. So if I log out, it now redirects me to login. I can do email@email.com and then have something like something and log myself back in, and I can log out once again. I should also be able to go over to the new route as well and create a new account if I want to with any email address like joe@email.com and something else for the password. And now it should log me in and redirect me to the home page. So the middleware is working in conjunction with all of our server forms to handle this for us. Well, I hope that was a big help, not just in understanding Firebase Auth, but also how Astro thinks, how to set up middleware, how those actions can help you provide type-safe content from a form, and do all this protected on a server-side route. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Happy coding.